So for those of you that haven't met me, my name's Petrina Ficarro and I'm the CEO for Cystic Fibrosis Queensland, and welcome to beautiful Brisbane on a winter's day. So we're very fortunate to have fantastic weather here, and I have to admit it's been an excellent conference so far with our clinical and medical, and we're really excited to be able to extend this into the community sessions. Today's session is on next stages and phases, and just before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please download the app, and then you'll go into the concurrent session too. I won't hold it up, not much point, you can't see it. But if you go into the next stages, phases, you'll see there's a live Q&A, and that's where you can submit some questions, and that will certainly keep things nice and tidy for us as we get to the end to the Q&A. I'd now like to swap over to my colleague, Kaz, who's going to introduce our first speaker. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Petrina. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Shannon Malone Briley. Shannon is a highly experienced and respected educator with over 20 years' experience. She's really just a mum doing what she can while surviving raising a teenager with CF. Let's make Shannon welcome.
Click on something here? Got it. There we go. So, thank you everyone for coming along. It's always really good to see a room full because I do remember back in the beginning days when it was all very overwhelming with a new child and having to confront all these things. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a brief introduction. I'm going to whirl through the early years, move through where I'm deep at the moment in the teenage years, and then a little bit of a focus on transitioning into adult care. Before I start, as alluded to, I'm also the president of CFACT. I'm a teacher, I'm a wife, and the most important thing I do is I'm the mother. I'm the mother to a young man with cystic fibrosis who's 15. Now, it's really important to note it before I start is that I never tell my stories from his perspective. This is always my perspective on living with CF because that's his journey and this is mine. Now, I don't need to tell anyone in this room what it's like to have a child diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. The feeling is beyond explanation. The devastating blow, overwhelming and deeply distressing that words just don't do it justice. A little while ago, I was shown a piece by an author called Emily Kingsley called Welcome to Holland. And I had a bit of an epiphany moment that this really summed up all the thoughts and the turmoil that ran around my mind. So I'm actually going to share that with you now. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip. You're going to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks, you make wonderful plans, the Colosseum, Michelangelo's David, the gondolas in Venice. You even learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very, very exciting. After months and months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? I'm not meant to be going to Holland. I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All I've dreamed about is Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan, and you've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is you haven't landed somewhere horrible or filthy or disgusting. It's just a different place. So you go out and you buy your new handbooks, and you learn a whole new language, and you'll meet a whole new group of people that you would never have met before. It's just a different place. It's slower than Italy. It's less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath and you look around, you begin to notice Holland has windmills. Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy. And they're all bragging about a wonderful time that they're having there. And for the rest of your life, you'll say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I'd planned to. And that pain just doesn't kind of go away. Now you add the cystic fibrosis perspective to this piece. You're immediately surrounded by doctors, nurses, specialists, physios, nutritionists, OTs, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and I'm out of breath. Baby bubble? What baby bubble? All telling you the worst news that you've ever heard about your precious bundle. They have cystic fibrosis, an incurable disease. Your world stops and you begin to puzzle together your next steps forward. At that moment, it's hard to believe that things become easier. And you just need to really move through all the emotions. Shock and disbelief, fear, anxiety, grief, sadness, guilt, self-blame, anger, frustration, helplessness, and loss of control. The journey through the early years is complex and unique, and the way that I've witnessed different families act is varied. We found the best way to navigate this stage of our son's life was to become our son's #1 advocate, to surround ourselves with the best doctors and care team that we could find. Our research told us that continuity of care was the most important thing that we could do. As a family, we realised very quickly that the people caring for our child needed to be the best that we could find, and we would not accept anything else. We attacked cystic fibrosis in the same way that we approached our careers. We were methodical, we were logical, and we were respectful. And my husband made a skills matrix. We made sure that we had everything we needed for our son's care. We had the right measure of excellence across the board. Our professionals needed to have expertise and specialisation. They needed to be open to comprehensive holistic care. They needed to understand the individual that was our son. They needed to understand our importance on maintaining healthy and a productive family dynamic. Moving into the teenage years. So you've finally got yourself settled in Holland. You've learnt the language, you love it, it's great. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to take that trip to Italy after all. And then, puberty, hormones, a teenager. It's meant we've had to learn a whole new language again. And you don't even get to go anywhere cool. Now, you're putting up with words like bra, skippity, Ohio, Sigma, all the things that they're talking about. Currently, we're deep in the teenage years. And as a family, we've decided to prioritise our son with the teaching of self-regulation and monitoring his risk-taking behaviour, whilst always acknowledging his deep need to want to be like everybody else. Again, we built a skills matrix and we made sure that we know what we're doing, and my husband and I are on the same team. We've taken this approach in the teenage years because there are certain things that change when autonomy and self-directedness comes along. Medical commitments. We've taken time to stop and understand the strict medical regime, including medication, therapies, and lifestyle modifications. We're teaching our son self-regulation, and we're trying to normalise all of this while staying on top of it. Growth and personal development in the teenage years. We're allowing him to take risks, to step outside of his comfort zone and explore new experiences. This has helped him to develop some valuable skills, such as decision-making, sometimes good, sometimes bad, problem-solving, and resilience. By engaging and letting him engage in these monitored risks, he's learning both from his successes and his failures, which contributes to his personal growth and the way that he attacks his disease. We're teaching him the importance of building confidence and self-esteem. This is important for all young people, but especially important for children that are on a complex medical journey. It helps him to recognise his abilities, his strengths, his limitations, which is crucial for his future success. We're trying our hardest to teach him responsibility and accountability. We need to make sure that he has an opportunity to learn about this, especially when it comes to his medical needs. He needs to understand the potential consequences of his actions and make informed decisions. In the teenage years and into transition, we are focused on maintaining mental health and really encouraging his autonomy and his advocacy for himself. He needs to balance the immense needs of cystic fibrosis and being a teenager. We as a family have focused on self-expression. As a boy mum, I'm aware that boys face societal pressures and stereotypes that discourage them from openly expressing their emotions. Ignoring or suppressing his emotions can have a detrimental effect on his mental health. As a family, we encourage him to prioritise his mental health, and we help to create safe places for him to express his feelings, seek support, and develop healthy coping mechanisms. The biggest standout point right now is the transition to adult care. And whilst he's only 15, this is something that's on the front of our minds always. When we're preparing him for adult care at the moment, it's required a massive shift in thought. Because when he was born 15 years ago, the modulators didn't exist. Our son has been fortunate enough to be on a modulator drug since his 6th birthday. There is an adjustment in thinking that needs to take place to let our young teenagers with cystic fibrosis be set up with success. Setting our teenagers up for success requires a supportive environment, access to resources, mentorship, opportunities for growth, and a medical team that aligns with our family's values. By providing him with all these skills and attitudes to be successful, it empowers him to realise his potential, pursue his goals, and lead a fulfilling life whilst transitioning into adulthood and adult-based care. So in summary, in the 15 years of this delightful person being on the earth, these are the things that have stood out to me the most. Number 1, surround yourself with the right people and remove the oxygen thieves. Your team of doctors and allied health build real relationships with them, built on mutual respect and trust. My son is very privileged to have a team like he does. They really understand the importance of our family unit. Number two, our family unit. We've discovered over the years that the 3 of us are much better when we're together. We collect memories together. We don't collect things. We focus daily on building and maintaining our family unit. Number 3, become an expert in your child. Make it your number 1 priority to make sure your child has everything they need to be successful and to navigate the medical system. Don't buy into all the noise on social media, and Google does not have the answers. Number 4, try not to borrow from tomorrow's problems. This one I've had to learn the hard way. But on the days when I can achieve this, everything seems a little bit easier. And number 5, the care team are your cheerleaders. Let them guide you. They are not the enemy. They are in your corner. I found this quote and it really struck a chord with me when I was doing this. Surround yourself with the dreamers and the doers, the believers and the thinkers. But most of all, surround yourself with those who see the greatness within you, even when you don't see it in yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon, and I'm sure you all loved the last photo of Shannon leaning in for the kiss. Yes, I was pretty horrified about that, like all teenage boys would be. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sally Ann Clark. She is a mother of 2, including a 10-year-old daughter who has cystic fibrosis. She's a passionate advocate and campaigner for the CF community, and she has raised over $65,000 with her family for CF ACT since 2014. She is also a former ACT Telstra Businesswoman of the Year, Young Businesswoman finalist, recipient of the National Emergency Medal and ACT Emergency Medal for service to the community during the 2019-20 bushfire season and the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Sally Ann, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Patrina. It's quite overwhelming when you hear someone talk about you like that. All right, I think I'll just click through. I use the mouse. Oh, you use the mouse, did you? All right. So thank you, first of all, for having me. For those, obviously, that don't know me, I am mum to a very competitive little girl. She competitively skips like you do down there, and she's currently at the New South Wales ACT State Championships. She loves Pokemon, art and craft enthusiast, and she also has CF, not that you would actually know it by looking at any of those pictures. We're all here today because in some way we are connected to someone that we know or love who has CF. And it's the connections that I actually wanted to focus on today. So I was initially given the topic of grief in the early years, and I thought, no one needs to dwell on that. But I will touch on those feelings and actually what it brought me and what the choices are that I made to focus on following, I guess, my child's new diagnosis. So I wanted to talk to you about the power of connections in those early years and how those connections will help make you a better parent, carer and supporter of that child. But also how those connections, though, make them a better advocate, carer and supporter of your child. The diagnosis and lived experience of parenting a child with a chronic health condition is mixed, and it often sets up the interactions we have with others in those first few months when we're rapidly trying to acquire all of this new information and find and understand what our new normal is. For me, while unexpected and truly utterly devastating, I chose to reflect and I guess be grateful for the wonder and joy that was brought into my life as a parent of a person with CF by the connections that I've made since the day she was diagnosed. To do this, though, I guess let me set the scene, and I'll take you back to that day. So Millie was diagnosed on a Thursday afternoon. She is an Easter Sunday baby, to give you a context of the time of year. She was diagnosed on a Thursday afternoon when she was 16 days old, and it just happened to be the day before the Anzac Day long weekend in Canberra. And for those familiar with Canberra that know, that weekend is the last hurrah to get down the south coast to enjoy the sunshine and the beach before the water starts to get cold. So it was utterly silent at the hospital. The town was quiet that weekend. The corridors were no different, let me tell you. It was quiet, it was lonely, and it felt suffocating because of it, especially obviously after the news that we'd just received. So let me pause though for a moment, and I have two slides in my presentation, this one and the next one. And what I wanted to share with you was, can't really see it that well, I really did terribly on the use of colours here, but was around the definition of what a connection is. And it's a relationship in which a person or thing is linked or associated with something else. And obviously we all know what that common connection is for all of us today. So prior to Millie's birth, I didn't have any connections with CF until I had the great joy of working with an amazing woman that would become a very dear friend of mine. This was well before I'd had Millie, who just happened to have a little brother who had CF. The little brother's name was Andy. So I got to know Andy through Carla, and in the day or two after Millie's was diagnosed, it was Carla that I reached out to. Carla and Andy connected me with CF-ACT, who then obviously connected me with the very unstoppable Shannon, who we actually just heard from. From here, the connection simply grew. Later that Anzac Day weekend, Millie's new doctor connected me to another CF mum, and it was through her eyes that I could see my future 10-year-old. For the very first time in 72 hours, because I saw images of this 10-year-old girl playing with her little brother and living life to the max, as only a 10-year-old knows how to do. So that 10-year-old is now an absolutely thriving 21-year-old who's just gotten back from overseas, having travelled with her share house girlfriends to Greece and Croatia and all of these other amazing places. After Millie was born, and as those new connections strengthened, particularly with other CF mums, both locally and interstate, I realised that it was those connections that I'd had prior to Millie that needed to change. My personal connections needed to bring me joy, calm, happiness, and a sense of equality on the parenting journey, regardless of a diagnosis. Friends, past connections were lost, and in some cases, I purposefully chose to let them go. The connections that I sought and that I became closest to over the first few years of Millie's life are the ones that were accepting of my emotional deficiencies that I had since diagnosis, a lack of a text reply for a week or two, and that sometimes life was tough and I just needed to have a whinge or a vent. They were accepting without judgment. They didn't take it personally. They didn't always have a solution. They would just want to help in any way they could, or they just wanted to listen and be there for me. They were always there in a crisis, CF-related or otherwise, but most importantly, they wanted the connection with me, my family, and my child. They were not scared of her or her diagnosis. So the connections I've made as part of this CF community extended into Millie's daycare room, her classroom, and her sporting endeavours after this. The advocacy of her clinic team at Westmead Children's Hospital in Sydney, her teachers, her coaches, all ensuring that Millie had a seamless experience at primary school and in her sporting and extracurricular activities, where her CF was acknowledged and treated with care, but it didn't define her, and she was just simply supported to thrive and to grow. Many of the conscious connections I've made and nurtured are all here today and reflected, many of them in this room today. The importance of events such as these in not only helping to bring together those impacted by CF to raise awareness and improve our knowledge and understanding of it, but they also help bring together and create these connections for CF families, which are vitally important connections for a disease where we obviously aren't truly able to socialise or connect. So I ask of everyone here today, foster connections, new or old, here in this room or in the next. For those with a newly diagnosed child, I still remember the grief that consumed me in those first few days, weeks and months. But I promise you, the grief lifts, the light returns, and your baby will bring you new friendships and connections that you never knew that you needed. So honestly, while I wish CF was not a part of my family story, I'm so grateful for each of the connections that have come into my life as a result, and it's definitely the best part of this disease. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sally Ann. I'd now like to warmly introduce our next speaker, Kaz Boyd, and many of you in this room, of course, know Kaz. Kaz is a director of CFA and sits on various committees, including Beat CF Project, Adult Cystic Fibrosis Community Advisory Committee. She's a consumer rep on the Australian Cystic Fibrosis Data Registry Peer Review Committee and is a trustee for the Australian Cystic Fibrosis Research Trust. Kath has been involved with CFWA for over 41 years. Kaz won the genetic lottery when she was diagnosed with CF in 1971 at the age of 4. In 1994, she underwent a successful double lung transplant. She can be easily spotted driving around by her number plate, New Lungs, and in her spare time, Kaz can be found lazing by a pool in Bali, enjoying a cocktail or jumping out of a plane. I wish we could all do that, Kaz. She is a passionate West Coast Eagles supporter, but of course in Lionstown, we won't hold that against you. Enjoys a Pinot Grigio, of course, in Albarino. Welcome, Kaz.
Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I just need to find this slide. Click on the link.
Use the mouse, I think it doesn't do that. Click on the mouse.
Here we go. Got it. Okay. If someone had told me 29 years, 8 months and 15 days ago I would still be alive, living an incredible life. I would not have believed them. But defying odds is what people living with CF do every day. Ironically, CF creeps up on you. You can sail along fine and look out because the tsunami is coming. I was born in 1967 and finally diagnosed in 1971. Being labelled a manic mother multiple times made my mother more determined to find out what was causing the frequent bouts of pneumonia and loose fatty bowel motions. A diagnosis of fibrocystic disease was finally given, along with the gut-wrenching words, "Take her home, enjoy her, because she won't survive to her 10th birthday." I'd won the genetic lottery. Little was known about CF in the 1970s. Treatment was limited to nebulised mucomist and physiotherapy, which was performed on the floor over 4 pillows. There was no such thing as Creon. Instead, there was this Vicase powder, a cement-looking, rotten egg-smelling, foul-tasting powder. Despite this, I considered I lived a normal life. CF was all that I knew. 1992 was a year that everything began to change. A pneumothorax took away valued lung function and the downhill slide had just begun. I was in hospital for a tune-up when my physician came in and said, "The Sydney transplant team are coming over in a few weeks. I really think you should see them." I was shocked to think my doctor thought I needed a lung transplant. I was holding down a job, albeit part-time, had an active social life. Why the hell would I need a transplant? After much deliberation, I decided to meet with the Sydney transplant team. At this stage, I was not aware of anyone with cystic fibrosis undergoing a transplant. At my initial meeting with the transplant physician, he informed me that a transplant was merely swapping one set of problems for another, and this was by no means a cure. But the most shocking words that came out of his mouth was if I didn't have this transplant, I'd be dead within 2 years. I could not comprehend how that was possible. I did a lot of soul searching, wondering if a transplant really was the right thing for me. However, it wasn't until a very close friend said to me if I was given a second chance at life, I would take it. In 1993, at the age of 26, Mum and I packed up our lives, leaving my 2 brothers behind, and said our goodbyes and headed to Sydney. My life consisted of visits between 2 hospitals, intravenous antibiotics, physiotherapy, and 1 green long oxygen tube. Reoccurring hemoptysis and lung damage made me realise I was fighting a losing battle with CF. Gradually doing the things that months before seemed so easy were increasingly difficult. I was on oxygen 24 hours a day. I would sleep with a VPAP machine. To say my life was horrendous was an understatement. I was fiercely clutching for the last bit of independence as this disease tried to wrench it from me. I was simply existing, not living. However, I always had a rush of adrenaline when the postie had delivered mail. Despite 30 stairs out the front of our unit, I would run down the stairs, well, in my mind I was running, and climb back up, each stair one at a time. Or on the bad days, I would literally be dragging my butt up each stair. On the 11th of November 1994, I was admitted to Royal Prince Alfred with increasing palpitations and shortness of breath. My weight had plummeted to 42 kilos. I was not responding to the antibiotics, and despite my best efforts, I needed Mum to help me shower. Here I was, 27 years old, and all my dignity and sense of hope was being viciously stripped from me. The simple task of brushing my teeth would render me breathless. I barely possessed the energy to breathe. I couldn't even make it to the toilet without soiling my pants. I knew my body was shutting down and I had no control over it. I was petrified to sleep, scared that if I closed my eyes I would not wake up. I was dealing with excruciating headaches as my carbon dioxide level was getting dangerously high day by day. 3 days after my admission, I was placed on a bird respirator. Unbeknown to me, my doctor pulled Mum aside and said, "We've pulled out all the stops for Kaz. There's not a lot more we can do. I just want you to know that she probably won't make it to transplant. In fact, we'd be surprised if she makes it to the weekend." Finally, just 12 hours before my predicted demise, I received my call. By this time, all the fight I had inside me had disappeared. I'd no longer had the energy or the inclination to fight this disease. CF had finally won. It had beaten me. As I was in the ambulance being transferred to St Vincent's for my transplant, I thought to myself, if I don't survive this, I can unequivocally say I gave CF one hell of a fight. My surgery took 5.5 hours. It's hard to imagine that all it took to change my life was a great pair of lungs and 5.5 hours. My first bout of rejection recurred 35 days post-transplant. I woke with a headache, fever, shortness of breath. A few days in hospital, a lot of methylprednisolone. I later returned home with lungs behaving beautifully, very hyper and resembling Bert Newton's love child. The joys of prednisolone. I have been extremely lucky with only 5 episodes of rejection over the 29 years. I've had the privilege of meeting my donor family. My donor, Natalie, died at the age of 23 of an aneurysm. She was pregnant with her 3rd child, Jade. I am Jade's godmother. Meeting Natalie's family was something I never set out to do. I merely wrote them a letter thanking them for how much their gift had changed my life. I was discharged from hospital 17 days after my transplant. During the 17 days, I experienced so many firsts. Being able to shower with the windows and doors closed and inhaling the steam without having a coughing fit. Discovering that you can actually walk, talk and breathe at the same time. Climbing stairs without having to catch my breath. And best of all, no sputum. Transplant is by no means a cure. It's merely swapping one set of problems for another. In my case, that has meant depression, pneumococcal pneumonia, fractured hip, various other fractured bones, chronic sinusitis, for which was requiring surgery 3 times a year and intravenous antibiotics every 3 months, and a hysterectomy due to cancerous cells. But without the transplant, I would simply not be here. I have been able to enjoy an incredible nearly 30 years that I would not have. I have worked, I have partied, I have paid taxes, and like most women, I have contributed to the economy. I have breath in my lungs like I've never known. Now I have the privilege of growing old, something that seems so far out of reach for me. I have experienced and sadly enjoyed menopause. I enjoy my afternoon nap, and the only reason I'm awake at 4 a.m. these days is because my bladder requires emptying. Some days I wake in the morning feeling like an 80-year-old, but I enjoy that pain as well. I've been able to see my nieces and nephews born, attend friends' weddings. I have loved and had my heart broken, and I've met Dan, the love of my life, and adopted a rescue cat. Transplant has given me the ability to climb hills, to dance until my legs hurt, and until I have no breath left. Enjoying the steam of a hot shower, I often wonder why I've lived so long and others don't get that chance. There has been times when I've been wrecked with survivor's guilt. Why did my donor die for me to live? Why was my brother killed? Why haven't my fellow transplant friends survived as long as I have? I don't have the answer to that, but all I can do is live my life to the fullest, not stress about the things I have no control over, and honour my donor in every way possible, and enjoy the incredible ability of walking, talking and breathing at the same time. I have been asked if I would change having CF. Would I? No, I wouldn't. CF has made me who I am. CF wasn't easy, but nor are most things in life. CF has made me strong, opinionated, passionate and value life. It has brought me wonderful friendships. One of the good things about being diagnosed in 1971 was that little or nothing was known about cross-infection. We shared hospital rooms together, we went to camps together, we made and sustained truly amazing friendships, which I hold very dearly today. CF has taken me on a ride that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I'm a firm believer that our character is never tested in comfortable or easy moments. It's the most difficult ones that reveal who we truly are. CF has presented some of the most trying, agonising, defining moments in my life, and as cliche as it may sound, I'm truly grateful for the ways that these experiences have shaped who I am. While it's certainly not the only defining factor in my life, CF is undeniably a part of who I am. Every year I celebrate my lung anniversary, generally with a party or jumping out of a plane or some other adventure. This year on the 21st of November, I will be in Bali, my happy place, with 30 friends celebrating this amazing milestone. I am fully aware that all this could be taken away from me due to infection, rejection or cancer, but at the moment I will take each day with gusto and enjoy each breath like it's my last. So on the 21st of November, have a drink for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaz. And Kaz, I might tag along to that party. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Judith Morton. Judith leads the South Australian Cystic Fibrosis Program. Judith has been involved in the care of people with cystic fibrosis and lung transplants for almost 30 years in centres across Australia. Welcome, Judith.
And firstly, I have to acknowledge hard acts to follow, the first three speakers, and particularly Kaz, thank you. You set my talk up beautifully in things that I can't express, but have certainly experienced with many, many people in the past 30 years. So thank you, and acknowledging both Peter and Alan, who have also been instrumental in my life and career. So thanks for that. So I'm the head of the adult service at Royal Adelaide Hospital in South Australia, but I've also previously been head of Monash Adult Service, worked with the St V's Transplant Service and headed up Transplanting Queensland at Prince Charles. So I have had a lot to do with many people with cystic fibrosis in many states, and it's been a great privilege. So you've probably heard Susan's talk earlier today with the launch of the registry, and thank you so much for Cystic Fibrosis Australia for putting on the conference for us, for being the custodians of our registry and everything that they do. So we know that there's almost 4,000 people living with cystic fibrosis today, and that increase is majorly due to increase in adults. The paediatric numbers have been fairly steady, but adults are increasing. So in perspective, like Kaz, 30 years ago when I started working in CF, most people didn't survive to adulthood. Would there be a career for me in adult CF? And look where we are, so very exciting. Although transplants were a great innovation, and Kaz has described the great second lives that we've all seen for people receiving that, we're all very happy that the need for transplant for people with CF is significantly reducing. But we have a lot of people with CF living with a lung transplant still, and they're important. One of the really nice things with modulator therapy has been that the transplant unit's now referring back to me to start people on Trikafta. So that's been very special. Just a snapshot of people living with CF in South Australia, and I've really put this up just to highlight the older age groups. So you can see it's been fairly steady. The blue bars are 2010, light green 22, and just for fun I added in 2024 last night. And you can see in those older age groups, even in the last 2 years, that big difference between the light green and the dark green. And in fact, over 20% of people living with CF in Australia now are over 40 years old. How come? How have we achieved this? Well, a century of progress. This disease was only identified less than a century ago, and look where we are. Then people didn't survive past infancy. As I said, 30 years ago, most people didn't survive to adulthood, and now from the registry, 61 years old is the median age. Remember, that's to now. We've only had the very highly effective modulators for the last 2 years, so just think where that age will be in the next 5 to 10 years. A shout out for research and everyone in the room. That's what we need to still be doing. We have people who we don't yet have the right modulator or highly effective therapies for, and we can still do better with what we're doing now. But this progress, even up to, if you look up to, with my pointer here, here's when we got modulators. Here's where survival has increased before modulators. It's not all about them. It's about the hard slog of everybody living with CF and their families and their caregivers, the healthcare professionals and the researchers that have got us here. So what have we got? We've got more people living with CF. We've got more people who are well living with CF. We've got older people living with CF, and Kaz has outlined some of the things that we're now looking after very nicely. So we've got many of the people who are older do have established disease and complications, or in the paediatric world, Most people don't have much manifestation of CF lung disease now. It's amazing. Most people come through to us with average FEV1 in South Australia anyway. That is normal in the 90%. It's remarkable. We don't yet know. We have a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknown for people, older people particularly, living with cystic fibrosis. What's going to happen? What does this mean? Good and bad. It's all challenging. What's reversible? What's not? And we've got new and emerging issues, and some that we might not really be aware that we're going to need to be dealing with in the next 10 to 20 years in the adult world. Pleasingly, in the paediatric world, the clinicians there are not having to deal with all the complications that we will be. So complications of CF, that's what we've traditionally all been experts in, as Keith Uwe put it very nicely yesterday, CFologists, and that's going to be a whole new specialty, I think, moving forward in adult medicine. I don't think CF is going to be a disease of respiratory physicians moving forward for much longer in the adult world. We're going to need much more general skills. So lung disease in the registry, even the very exciting slide here, I think, which is just 3 years, we have to acknowledge Trikafta there, how much lung function has improved in people over 18. Overall, a 10% increase, and that's across the board, not just the people who are eligible for modulators at this time. So we still have lots more room for improvement. Less Pseudomonas, the bugbear, I know in the paediatric world, coming in for the eradication of Pseudomonas. Well, what have we seen there? Great increases in survival and people coming through to the adult world. In South Australia, the paediatric team nicely deliver up only about 3% of people now with Pseudomonas, and that's a great impact on our service and for the rest of the lives. What are the other big challenges? So nutrition, we know that nutrition has been the other big factor contributing to survival, and as part of that, the word death. But now malnutrition is something we don't see as much of. So whereas a lot of adults, and I'm sure the children will tell you living with CF and coming to clinic in the past, they're terrified of having their weight checked, because if their weight's low, they know they're coming into hospital. So one of the many unspoken traumas that we only really find out down the track. It's not just lung function's low, Pseudomonas grows, weight is low, hospital. Quite traumatic for young people and their parents. And we're still seeing that, so we've still got lots of those usual challenges. But in the adult world, we're dealing increasingly with people who are over-nutritioned rather than under-nutritioned, and that's going to bring lots of challenges in the future, as we're also now dealing with the diseases of ageing. Who would have thought? Kaz has nicely described some of those. You know, we're lung doctors, but now we're doing all sorts of other things. So I think there's two big topics in our clinics currently. Diabetes. People with poorly controlled diabetes will get complications, and more complications will happen with age, and people are ageing, which is fabulous. But we know complications of diabetes are there, and these are to give the examples of, in the adult world, how are we going to manage our adult CF services? What will we be looking after? So eye disease, these are very real things, and for young people with those challenges of adolescence, risk-taking behaviour, well, things like not looking after your diabetes could have consequences. How do we help them to grow into the best versions of themselves with the least complications, which we know will be there if we can't help them to manage this better? Kidney disease, peripheral neuropathy, vascular disease that can lead to foot ulcers and amputations, heart disease and strokes. These are all going to need to be a skill set we either manage in the adult CF clinics or we don't, and these are some of the big challenges and questions that we need to work towards. This is the other big one, the prevention and treatment of CF lung disease. With less symptoms, there's obviously less incentive to do the onerous tasks of looking after your lungs, and let's face it, most people don't anymore. We're very excited when someone actually comes in and says they're still doing their nebulizers or their physiotherapy. We'd love, like with everything as a doctor, you know, you want to always give people good news, you always want to give them hope. We'd love to be able to say that's okay, but we're not there yet. The right advice for us is to maintain our enthusiasm, to encourage people to do things that we know they're not doing, but also just to encourage it. So at some point, if they need to, or as the evidence evolves, we'll hopefully be changing that advice, but we're not there yet. This is a nice slide. Probably we don't want to be thinking of it. So 10 common chronic conditions for people over 65 from the National Centre for Ageing. And we know that some of these cross over with the complications of CF. So high blood pressure contributed to by modulators. So we're needing to upskill in hypertension management, high cholesterol, diets of a lifetime. The significant psychological impact there is of people who are used to those McDonald's, high-fat, high-energy diets of the past, and particularly people in our older age groups, that's how they've eaten for 50 years and more, and needing to change that, that's a big challenge. But we know obesity is one of the conditions in adulthood that contributes to other bad health outcomes. Arthritis, we know that people with CF get CF arthropathy. Now we're going to be getting osteoarthritis from ageing. I've touched on diabetes, chronic kidney disease, depression in older people. We know 50% of people with CF will suffer depression or anxiety over the course of their lifetime, but let's face it, so do probably most people in the room. So we need to deal with all these new things, and the last one I find very amusing, but I shouldn't, but who would have thought we'd be dealing with dementia and old age 30 years ago, caring for people with CF? Cancer screening is another big one that's changing for us. So we know there's an increased incidence of colorectal cancer in cystic fibrosis, so we're recommending colonoscopies from 40 years old. And these are just examples of some of the big changes that we're doing as lung docs. And earlier in people post-transplant, which I'm sure Kaz could tell you about. But also, we've got all these other conditions that aren't CF related. We need to make sure people are in the usual healthy adult screening programs. Breast cancer from 50 years old, younger if there's risk factors, make sure we're on top of those. Cervical cancer, make sure we're counselling for that. I can't see us doing pap smears, but there's other ways to screen for this. We're starting lung cancer screening next year for smokers, so pleasingly our community are largely smoke-free. They value their lungs, but again that's going to take a lot of the respiratory physician workforce away. So probably good timing that we're going to need to be attracting different people. What's new? Modulators, well, they're very expensive. You know, we have the privilege in the Western world largely to have access, but many people throughout the world that don't. So we've got new pharmaceutical companies coming into that space, which is fantastic. We're going to get better modulators for people who already have access. For instance, hopefully Trikafta will morph into a once daily medication soon. We've also got other companies, which is competition, drives down the price. That's good for everybody. But it's still really important to take part in research in other areas and, you know, harder at the moment to attract people to research studies. People are well, people are busy. They want to, understandably, step away from the hospital world a bit. And 30 years of promise of gene therapy, well, we're finally in the human trials, so that's very exciting. So, model of care. What will adult CF care look like into the future? Most people with CF in this era are able to achieve their life goals without the limitations of those before them. It's truly remarkable to have watched this change. So again, from our fabulous registry giving us this information, we all kind of know it, but it's nice to have the facts and be able to use that to advocate for our future adult CF services. People pretty equivalent to the population without CF are completing university, completing apprenticeships, completing diplomas. Most people are in the workforce now, either full-time, about 50%, you can see there, or part-time. Children, we already know that pregnancies over here have more than doubled with the access to Trikafta. First year of Trikafta, we had 18 pregnancies, whereas usually we'd have 1 to 2 per year. So it's amazing, but now we have lots of babies in clinic, not just the staff, but the patients. So that's got its own challenges. How do you get to your clinic appointment in the morning when your child's crying and then dirty nappy in the car? So we have to make allowances in our model of care to care for this. We love it every week, you know, very disappointed when the babies don't come to clinic, but we have a lot of them now. And again, that's needs to help with the structure of our clinic. We have to be a little bit more flexible for some people, but we do need to have expectations that people come to their appointments and come on time, and that's one of the other big challenges in adult care. We'll have clinics where greater than 50% of people don't attend with less than 24 hours notice. So again, thinking of our models of clinic and how we have to do, we at the moment, because we've lived through the last year of CF, think, okay, well that's because they're so busy and they're living their lives, but it's still a challenge to manage those clinics. So what are some of the emerging conditions? I think not much is said about neurodiversity and gender diversity, but that's emerging with young people these days. We have 6 transgender people in our young adolescent community. That's something that we need to know how to navigate that. Again, it's not a specialty that we're going to have in CF clinics, but knowing how to get people to the right clinics with the right care. Mental health has always been an issue, and I think many people have touched on the challenges there of dealing with a chronic disease and dealing with a new disease. And Kaz has said very nicely the guilt that comes, how come I got a transplant? How come I'm still alive? And that's very real for many of our older people in clinic. When people had access to modulators through clinical trials and compassionate access, a lot of them kept quiet about it because they felt very bad for their peers and their friends around them that didn't yet have access. So that's very real in our clinic. Antenatal care, that's a nice one. We're getting very good at that. Contraception, menopause, who would have thought? So we struggle our way through those ones, phone a friend. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, kidney disease we're seeing, and very sad when we see people on dialysis where we know it could have been prevented. What could we have done more to prevent that with them? But there's many challenges of life for people, and cancer screening, as I've alluded to. So what will it look like into the future? Some people are eligible for modulators, some are not. Keep our ear to the ground for research studies, for more things for our people who aren't yet on modulators. Keep them as well as they can be until we get them their therapies. Some people have established complications and some people have none. Ongoing participation in research is critical. People have less dependence and attendance at hospital, and that's a fabulous thing. We often think, how would we be as doctors having to take, half a day off work every couple of months? Probably in our jobs it wouldn't be doable, particularly for our junior doctors, and that's where a lot of young people in new jobs are. They can't take that time off. It does impact them. Haven't mentioned it there, but telehealth, that's very big in all our CF services now, and it's wonderful. Not only does it mean people don't have to come in, it also means we can see people more easily and more often through telehealth than we could before if we need to. Less need for transplantation. It was a great innovation, and we have many people living with transplants still, but I'm sure Kaz would attest to say it would be nice not to have those complications of transplant. Less hospital and disease-based trauma, that's a big one. Just coming to hospital is a trauma for many people. Breaks our heart to see some people in ED and really anxious, really suffering. We try and avoid emergency departments as adult CF clinics, but sometimes they're still necessary. So increase in multi-system complications with age, both CF-specific and non-specific, and so our models of care need to change. We don't quite yet know how. There's lots of unknowns, but they do need to change. How are we going to care for more people living with CF? Do we have the right mix of healthcare professionals? Do we have the right specialists? Health concerns and needs are changing. We need to be prepared, and co-design with people with CF is critical. We've just completed the first chapter of the latest standards of care, and our first 3 authors for the first time in a testament to co-design are people living with CF and a parent of a child living with CF, and that's been a wonderful experience to have them actually involved, not just tokenistic opinions or consulting, but actually authorship with us, so that's been really exciting. So finally, and this applies to everyone in the room and everyone caring for people with CF, so thank you for listening today, and particularly again, thanks for the 3 speakers before me.
And that concludes our session, so I'd just like to thank all of our speakers this morning. We don't have time for a Q&A session, but of course all of our speakers will be available during the lunch break. Thank you, everybody.